Test, test. All right. All right, how's everyone doing? Good? Yeah. All right, our next speaker is Pam Aungst Cronin, and she'll be presenting how to prepare for the dreaded Google Analytics 4 upgrade deadline. Just a reminder, just want to ask everyone to turn their cell phones off. Also, there's an after party after the event. And if you had any questions prior to the after the Q&A with Pam, you can find her at the Happiness Lounge. Without further ado, Pam.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me to nerd out about Google Analytics. Unfortunately, this is a different tone than most of the Google Analytics talks that I do. Usually people are like excited to learn more, but with this whole GA4 thing, I think we're all feeling this sense of dread and dismay and anxiety, right? Yeah, so we're going to try to smush that as best we can and make you feel a little better about it. But I am going to be really sarcastic and cranky about it at the same time. So there's me reacting to how they did this. So our first item on the agenda is for you to listen to me complain about Google Analytics 4 and Google's incredibly poor rollout plan for it. And then, at some point, I will stop complaining and show you what you need to do to seamlessly transition to GA4 and back up your historical data because of the poor rollout plan. That's going to be very important. If you want to download the slides, you can go to pamandmarketing.com/slides. There's a bunch there, but this one will be on the top. Leave that there for just a sec, and I'll show it again at the end. All right, we do have a specific Q&A portion at the end, so try to hold your questions till then, but if you're like completely lost on what I'm talking about, you need a quick clarification, feel free to chime in. All right, about me, basically, I'm a major nerd. A lot of you know me already, so I'm not gonna go through all of this, but I've been working with Google Analytics for a really, really long time is the point. All right, so let's get to the dumpster fire that is GA4. A lot of people say, wait, what? What's GA4? A lot of people have heard of this, a lot of people haven't. Google Analytics 4, aka GA4, is the latest version of Google Analytics, and everyone hates it. That's really the key takeaways. Yeah, so it's the 4th iteration of Google Analytics. A lot of people don't realize that it's the 4th iteration. Universal Analytics was the most recent version, which was the 3rd version, but they never really referred to it as GA3. So throughout this, you'll probably see me mix up referring to it as UA, referring to the current version, which is the 3rd version, as UA for Universal Analytics, or sometimes I call it GA3. Just kind of want to get people used to thinking of UA as GA3. Google Analytics actually started not as Google. It started as Urchin in 1997. It was another company entirely, and Google bought them out. And so the 2nd iteration was in 2005, the GA.js. 2012 brought us Universal Analytics, which is what we're still on now. I actually didn't realize it's been quite that long. And that was analytics.js, and Google Analytics 4, oops, I have a typo. It says JTAG.js. It is GTAG.js. I will fix that. So I'm going through all this because if you take a quick peek at the source code on your website and you find your Google Analytics code, you can know what version you're on basically by looking for ga.js, but pretty much no one's on Urchin anymore. Rarely do I see a ga.js, but I actually saw one the other day. Yeah, it's spotted in the wild. Most people are on analytics.js now, or gtag.js because Google's been harassing us to upgrade the script long before they started harassing us to upgrade the version of the software. So that's how you can quickly check, and I will fix that for anyone who downloads the slides. I will fix that to a G right after this. Okay, main differences between GA3 and GA4. GA4 tracks websites and apps together. So in the past, if you had a mobile app, you had to set up Google Analytics separately for that. Now it's all unified. There's a new event-based measurement protocol versus the current session-based protocol. That doesn't mean anything to any of us other than it will come up later as one of the reasons that this is a very difficult transition. And it's just way more complex. Exactly, right? As if Google Analytics wasn't complex enough already. They're like, here, have some more complexity. Deal with it. But I'm going to give you a tip about that too, along the way. All right, so let's talk about the worst rollout plan of all time. Most people's reaction is like, all right, fine. You know, we're used to being forced to upgrade software here and there in our lives, and so people are like, all right, fine, I have to upgrade to GA4, but I can just import my old Google Analytics 3 data, right? Nope, you cannot. And as if that wasn't bad enough already, they're not going to let you keep that forever either. They'll let you keep it for a while, but not for, I'm sorry, I'm giving this gentleman a heart attack. Don't worry, I'm going to bring it back around to how to handle all this without too much anxiety. It's going to be okay, I promise. Okay, so like I said, the new event-based measurement protocol, say that 10 times fast, is apples and oranges to the old session-based one. So I kind of get it that you can't just import data from GA3 into GA4. It's like, think of it like a different programming language almost, with some crossover, but it's really a different kind of language per se. So I kind of get that. But I mean, the least they could have done for us is allow us to import some of it to some pieces that are common, or allow us to access it long term. But it's Google's world and we're just living in it. So we got to try to make lemonade out of these lemons, which is what I'm going to help you do. When are they doing this? Well, some people think they have time because they keep saying that Universal Analytics properties will stop collecting data as of July 23rd, 2023. So the immediate reaction is, oh, okay, I got a year before I have to deal with this. No, you got to deal with it now, because since you can't import GA3 data into GA4, if you come next year, you want to compare your traffic year over year and see how your traffic did between 2022 and 2023, you won't be able to, because you won't have that. You won't have now to July 2023 imported into GA4. So you got to basically just start using GA4 now. You can use it concurrently with the current version side by side, but you want to do that so that you have that ability come next year. Your future self will thank you when you have to do year-over-year comparisons and you're actually able to. So now is the time. I would highly encourage you to do this before July 23rd of this year. All right, so you thought that I was done with the complaining part. No. I'm going to take you through a not-so-brief tour of some of the many annoying things about Google Analytics 4, just to ramp up your anxiety a little more before I take it back down. There's a lot of missing metrics, including 3 of my all-time favorites: bounce rate, time on page, and average session duration have been removed. Some have sort of similar replacements, and we'll get to that. So overall, you know, we're going to figure out how to deal with this, but that was very, very, very sad news, the death of bounce rate, time on page, and average session duration, amongst these others. Also, users are defined differently. You know, as if it wasn't complex enough and this transition wasn't difficult enough. They're like, let's just like what we used to call users, let's just like make it something else and call that users. And I mean, obviously it still refers to the people that are coming to your website, but in the current version of Google Analytics, if you see a report that just says users, the word by itself, users, it means total users. And then there's a separate metric for new users. In Google Analytics 4, there is that total users metric, but that's not the one that they call users. If you see the word users by itself in GA4, it refers to this new metric, which is called active users, users that have been active on your site in the last 28 days. And then there's a separate metric for new users. So you will not see the numbers match up, because users in GA4 is your total users, whether they were active in the last 28 days or not. And users in users in GA3 are, no, I said that, but see, I can't even keep track of all this. Users in the current version are total users. Users in the upcoming GA4 version are users that have been active in the last 28 days. So don't panic if you don't see those numbers match between the current version and the new version. And there's a lot of instances like that, but I just picked that one as a pretty understandable example of how they're like measuring things separately. They're also counting sessions differently. So, let's reinvent math just to make this even harder. Your session count will also be different, probably lower in Google Analytics 4 than in the current version because of a variety of different nuances, including the fact that GA4 doesn't create a new session when the traffic source changes mid-session, but the current version does. So if you came in from an organic SEO search and then you hit the back button later on, 10 minutes later, you see a Facebook ad for that same site and you come back in on the Facebook ad, a session is considered 30 minutes long. So if you switch the source that you came from in the same session, its current version of Google Analytics would count that as 2 sessions. GA4 was counted as 1. Again, the nuances aren't incredibly important. The past midnight thing, too, is another little thing. But these are just examples of how GA4 does math a little bit differently than the current one. So again, don't panic if your numbers are different. This one, I was pretty upset about, too. I'm upset about all this. No more goals. Although I always hated the word goal. I thought they should have always called it a conversion all along, because that's what it is. But we got used to goals, and you could set them up fairly easily and define what you want to consider a conversion fairly easily. And in GA4, we don't have that anymore. You still have to set up your conversions. They're calling them conversions, so that actually makes sense. Something makes sense for once. But a conversion is set up as taking an event and marking it as something that you can consider a conversion, or more likely creating a custom event and then marking that as something you consider a conversion. It's not the hardest thing in the world, but it is more complex and annoying. Also, views. This is probably my #1 thing I'm upset about. I rely on views a lot. I deal with a lot of sites that have, including my own, that have different sections for different brands or subdomains or even different domains, but they're owned by the same brand, so they're tied into the same Google Analytics account. And we separate them with views. You got one that has everything, and then one that has just the one part, and then one that has just the other part. You can't do that anymore. You have to just look at everything all together, and whatever report you're on, you can do what they call a comparison and like split it out on the fly, but I haven't found anything yet that makes it as easy as views did. There's a little bit of a rumor that they may bring views back, but I'm not going to get my hopes up just yet. There is another thing called explorations, which is basically a fancy word for custom reports. Well, that's another thing they made a lot harder than it used to be. Was building a custom report is beyond complex now. Hopefully they do continue to refine this, though. This is the first iteration, so I have a smidge of hope that they'll make it a little bit easier. But yeah, no good solution for this one right now. I found workarounds for pretty much everything else thus far, except for this one. Well, I found workarounds within Google Analytics for pretty much everything else except this one. I will show you an external workaround for this after. And segments. Oh, I love segments. They're also missing now. That was like, I was like, okay, we have no views, so I'll just use segments. No, I mean, they're there, kind of buried in that crazy complex explorations thing. And we kind of get the same functionality out of comparisons, although it's much more manual. So yeah, that's basically how I feel about that, is how Charlie looks right there. All right, I'm almost done complaining, I promise. The complaints are building context, though, to how I'm going to show you how to deal with this. All right, so after GDPR and CCPA and all this data privacy stuff was enacted and Apple started taking away cookies and whatnot, we are heading toward a cookieless world. Later next year, I forget exactly when, Chrome is going cookieless. So, and then there's like all these laws about how long you can keep people's data. So I get it. You have to put some form of data retention controls in there. And in the current version of Google Analytics, it is 2 years, which doesn't really harm anybody too much if they forget to go in and extend that, because when was the last time you looked at your data from 3 years ago? Yeah, probably 3 years ago or 2 years ago. So 2 years was fine. In Google Analytics 4, it can only go up to 14 months, but the default is 2 months. 2 months. So many people are not going to realize that, and they're going to switch over, and 3 months later be like, oh my God, expletive, where is my data? So very first thing, and I'll walk you through the whole setup. Very first thing you want to do is make sure that you flip that 2 months to at least 14 months. Also, you want to start looking into a way to store your data even longer than that. But again, let's crawl before we walk and then walk before we run. Okay, so don't panic. I'm done complaining now, maybe. I have a plan. So everybody breathe. We're going to meditate on my 3-part plan surviving this transition. First, I'm going to walk you through setting up Google Analytics 4 right now. If you have your laptop, get ready and just do it right now. You don't have to worry about it. I'll take you step by step. Just follow me and get it done. If you don't have your laptop, no worries. This is being recorded. The slides are available, and you can go back through this anytime. You're definitely going to want to back up your GA3 data because, like we said, it can't be imported and will be deleted. And you want to set up Data Studio. This is like my real key to surviving all of this is, as we said, Google Analytics in its current iteration is complex enough. GA4 is even more complex. So why are we torturing ourselves with working with these incredibly complex interfaces when there's a better way? And I feel that Data Studio is a better way, and it's free. So we'll get to that too. But let's, again, crawl before we walk before we run. So let's start crawling. We're going to set up Google Analytics 4. The first thing you want to do is go into your current analytics, and there is an admin gear on the lower left. You've probably been in there before. When you go into your admin settings, there's 3 columns, and in the center column, you'll see GA4 Setup Assistant. Make sure my mouse shows up there. Okay, my mouse shows. So click the Setup Assistant, and then click the Get Started button. Oops, there we go. All right, here's where it gets a little tricky. If you already have a gtag.js analytics script powering your current version of Google Analytics, then you can just check this little box here to enable GA4 to collect data from your site with the existing tag. But that only applies if you have gtag.js. So if you go to your website, right-click, go to View Page Source, Control-F or Command-F, and search for the word analytics or even UA-. You can find which one you're on. Remember that 4 iteration thing from before. GA.js won't work for this. Analytics.js won't work for this. But if you see gtag.js in your analytics script, then you can just check that box and it makes life a little bit easier. If not, no worries, we'll get through it. You just don't check that box and you keep going. And then it's going to offer you to go to your new Google Analytics 4 property. So you click the big blue button, go to your GA4 property. And then you're going to be prompted to install your tag because, again, this is for people who have not checked that box. If so, you just get to skip all this. But so you're going to go to the arrow under Tag Installation, under Collection. And then you got to click again on these arrows. Sorry, I went too fast on that. Eventually, you keep clicking these arrows until you get to your data stream. That's a new term that they're using for really the script and what it does to bring data in, calling it a stream. It's basically your tracking script. So you get through all that, and then, again, if you did not check the box a few steps ago, it prompts you to add a new on-page tag. And so you can copy-paste that code just like, oops, I keep clicking by accident. You can copy-paste that code into the head of your website just like you always did with every iteration of Google Analytics before, or you can use a WordPress plugin, but make sure that it's GA4 compatible. Some of the Google Analytics plugins for WordPress have not yet upgraded their code to use the GTAG.js. Better Analytics is one that I spotted the other day, that it's still relying on analytics.js and won't work for GA4. So make sure that if you use a plugin, it specifically says that it's GA4 compatible. You also have the option of using Tag Manager, which I greatly prefer, but that's a whole nother like 7 sessions we don't have time for today. But if you are familiar with Tag Manager, I highly suggest going that direction instead. But we're keeping it simple for now. So copy paste your code into the head of the website. Or again, if you did check that box because you know you have GTAG already, you can use the existing on-page tag, but there's just one more step. Make sure you follow these directions right here, where you have to copy your new Google Analytics property ID, which now starts with G dash. We're used to seeing UA dash blah, blah, blah. Now it's G dash blah, blah, blah. So you want to copy that, go back into your current version of Google Analytics, and there will be an option to connect the two, and then you paste that in there. And that's how the current code collects, like kind of through GA3 to GA4. But you do have to connect it. So just to try to recap that as simply as I can, if you were able to check the box, remember to go back and connect it to GA3. If you were unable to check the box, just put the new code on the site in place of the existing code. You swap them out. You don't want to. All right, so once you've implemented the code, go to your site and click on a few pages, then go to reports. In GA4, go to reports, and you'll see one called real time, and just make sure you see yourself there to make sure it's working. Very important, as I said before, you're going to do all this just to have your data deleted every 2 months. You definitely want to go immediately into the center column of settings in GA4, click on data settings, and go to data retention. Flip that 2 months to 14 months, hit save, do it immediately. If you do nothing else as part of this setup, do that. All right, now another thing you want to make sure to do, because it won't be done for you by default, whereas a lot of the property settings like time zone and stuff are like imported automatically when you do the GA4 setup assistant, the goals, aka conversions, are not. I'm still not used to calling it conversions, even though I've preached for years that it should be called conversions, so I keep saying goals. So to configure your conversions, there's a new section in the side menu of GA4 that says configure. So it's a little bit different than the settings gear. It's kind of like configuring your reports as opposed to configuring your account. So that's where you go to create. Most likely you're going to need to create an event. Most conversion events don't just happen by themselves. So you're going to need to create an event and specify the conditions that trigger that event. So it's actually very similar to the old way where you would say, all right, like I want to make a destination goal for when someone fills out my form and they land on like the confirmation or thank you page afterwards. So you would go in the old version, you would say destination goal, you'd put the URL of the thank you page and say, this is what I consider a conversion, is when someone hits this because they only hit it when they've filled out my form. It's very similar to that. It's just kind of a whole new language of the way that you have to define it. It's parameter, operator, value, and you have to use the page location instead of what was just simply called page in the last version. But you do get used to it kind of quickly. It's similar in nature. So that's how I set up my contact form goal conversion in, I can't get used to it yet, in GA4. All right, so then you go to, so you've created your custom event that you will consider a conversion. Then you have one more step. You got to mark it as a conversion. So you go back into that configure section, click on conversions, and click on new conversion event. Oh, I forgot to mention before, you should, whatever custom name you give it, copy it to your clipboard before you leave, because I've done that and like gotten to this part and I'm like, crap, I forgot what I called it. So copy the event name that you made before you leave that menu. Then go into the conversions menu, paste it in, hit save, make sure, I mean, this will happen by default, but just put eyes on it. Make sure that the mark as conversion toggle button is active, and that's all you should need to do. Then again, go to your site, test the action, go to the real-time reports, make sure it works. Okay, so, a lot to get through in a short time. I'm gonna go a little bit fast, but we have time for Q&A, and I'm not running away afterwards, so even if your question doesn't fit into Q&A, just I'll be in that happiness lounge to make you happy and answer your questions. All right, very important to start backing up your GA3 data now because, again, we're not going to be able to import it or keep it forever in Google Analytics. So there's no good way to do this unless you go to the level of doing like a data warehouse, like a BigQuery, Snowflake kind of thing, where you sync it up in the background and you get every little bit and byte of data out of it. It's possible, but that's more of like an enterprise level solution. And most people don't need to keep every little thing forever anyway. So basically, I suggest going to each of your favorite reports in the current version of Google Analytics. Like my absolute favorite is under acquisition and then all traffic and channels. You see just the buckets, the different channels that bring traffic to your site, organic search, paid search, referral, email, etc. I go there all the time. So that was the first one I did this with. Go there, set your date range to, unless you have a really high traffic site, set your date range to last month. On a really high traffic site, I would do weekly. But most sites, I think it's fine to grab this data monthly. Annoyingly, when you set when you go to whatever report in the current version of Google Analytics and the new one, it only shows you 10 rows of data. And so you got to go to the bottom right-hand corner and flip that to the max, which is 5,000 rows. And this is why you want to do it weekly. If it's a higher traffic site, you might have more than 5,000 rows. Most of them that we deal with will have 5,000 rows. So if you go further with this process and you don't expand that, you're only going to get the first 10 rows sent to you every month, which would not be helpful. So then click, not lick. You can see how I rushed to put this together. Don't lick the share button. Click the share button in the upper right. And what you're doing here is entering your email so that you can have this data emailed to you automatically monthly. But remember to select CSV in there. It defaults to PDF. CSV is the most portable, so if you do decide to do some kind of data warehousing or even just import your old data into Data Studio or something in the future, you're going to thank yourself for selecting CSV here instead of PDF. And type in, select monthly, type in a name for the report. You have to type in a body, which is silly, so I just retyped the name. Prove your humanity and hit send, which is counterintuitive. It's really should say save. It's not going to send it to you immediately, but it will send it to you on whatever you specify, like monthly on the first day of the month. This is a better way than just downloading your data now. Like I know a lot of people right now are going through all their favorite reports and just, hitting export and save, export, save, export, save. Well, you got to remember to do that every month from now until July 23rd, 2023. And so you're not going to remember. I mean, maybe you will. I'm not that organized to remember to do that every month. So you definitely want to automate that, not do a one-time backup. Okay, and here's the part where I suggest that we just get as far away from Google Analytics interface as we possibly can. Not the data, but the interface. Save yourself the agony of having to learn an extra complex software and consider Google Data Studio. Occam's razor, the simplest answer is usually the best one. If Google Analytics is complex and hard to navigate and hard to learn, get out of it. Pull the data into something else that's much easier to use. Now, I won't claim that Data Studio is easy to set up, but there are a lot of templates. There's a template gallery of reports that you can just make a copy, connect it to your Google Analytics, and you're good to go. And then over time, you can start to learn how to customize it. And I think, again, your future self will thank you for this, because if you get used to relying on Data Studio for reporting instead of the Google Analytics interface, you're not going to feel too much pain from this transition. There are a few metrics that are kind of gone and missing in the new Google Analytics, but I'll pull this up bigger in a second. There are sort of close enough equivalents for most of them, and I've set up a report that you can, by going to bit.ly/unifiedGA, you can go there, make a copy, connect it to both your current Google Analytics, GA3, aka UA, Universal Analytics, and your new GA4. And again, don't panic if the numbers don't match. They won't match, but they should be like kind of close. And this way, if you get used to relying on this for your data instead of the Google Analytics interface, then and this is going to keep happening in the future too. There's going to be GA5 and 6 and so on, and it's going to be different every time. So instead of torturing yourself with having to relearn it every time, just pull the data into something so much simpler. The visualizations in Data Studio are just so much better anyway. So I've been relying on Data Studio for a long time now. Obviously, I just on the fly, I'll go into Google Analytics to check something quickly, but for all of our clients reporting, I set them up on Data Studio as the first thing, and then these transitions aren't as painful. So I'm going to put the slides link up one more time real quick, and then I think I'm almost spot on. Oh, I got 15 minutes instead of 10, right? Nice. All right, so if you want to grab the slides, there's the link, and then I'm going to pull that Data Studio report up bigger so you can see it better. All right, let's do that. Oh, that's fantastic. Of course, I did this so late at night that I messed up the access, but I'll fix that too so you can get it. In addition to fixing where I told you to lick things. Thank you for being my guinea pigs for my first GA4 presentation. A few bumps in the road, but we got through it. All right, so you can see that bigger now. So once I fix that link, you'll be able to open this up in Data Studio and go to the option where it says make a copy. If you haven't used Data Studio before, you'll have to just set up your account real quick, but it's just the Google product like everything else, so you can just use your same Google account that you use for Google Analytics. Actually, highly recommend using the same exact Google account that you use for Google Analytics. It'll make connecting your data a lot easier. And set up, your Data Studio, and then pull up this report, make a copy, and connect. When you make a copy of it, you will see. Actually, let me get out of presentation mode here. Escape. All right, we're going to go to Edit. So this is where you'll go File, Make a Copy, and it will connect you. It will prompt you to. It'll show you how I have my regular and GA4 accounts connected here. So it'll just prompt you to go here, go down to Create Data Source, select Google Analytics, pick your, so this is why you want to be in the account that you have it in already. Pick your account, and let me get back out of here. Oops. I think I'm not seeing my whole screen because I can't click out of that. All right, let me try to go back button. There we go. Couldn't find the X. And so it'll prompt you to connect the two. Just connect the two, and then this should populate with your numbers, and you can start to get used to. You can customize this. You can add pages. You can add more like if you have an e-commerce site, maybe you don't care about the conversions as much as the transactions and the revenue. You can replace that. I kind of designed it in a funnel kind of way where you've got just like your awareness metrics of like your total traffic coming to the site, total number of people coming to the site, and then the engagement metrics, my favorite three, RIP, average session duration, pages per session, and bounce rate. But there are sort of equivalent new ones in GA4, the engagement metrics. User engagement time is kind of, there we go. All right, we got the 10-minute mark, right? Okay, so, all right. The average session duration is kind of equivalent to user engagement time. Pages per session, kind of equivalent to what I had to create a smidge manually here they had events per session. So I quickly created a custom metric for events that are page views per session. So I filtered that a bit. That's a nice thing about Data Studio. You can filter any metric that you'd like. You click on it, and this was by default. It was the total events of all kinds per session. I made a filter to say I only want to see them if the event name is equal to page view. And then I was basically able to recreate that metric of page views per session. And engagement rate is very similar to bounce rate. I will stop there now and take questions. They told me to have you walk up to, if you can, the microphone. Otherwise, I can repeat the question so that people on the live stream can hear it. All right, she won the race. She got there first.
So my head is spinning and I'm fuming, and this is just scratching the surface of what I need. So I have two quick questions. First, do you do Zoom consulting?
Yes.
I will be speaking with you later.
I'm a data therapist on the side.
The second question I think is more for everyone, which is, I will go through the pain of all of this, or I will decide to not do this for my clients ever again. But if I go through the pain of all of this, is this addressing anything about Google Analytics spam?
Great question. Is it fixing the spam problem? Not entirely, but I think thus far, and as I'm early on in the journey here, I think it's doing a slightly better job at filtering out known bots than GA3 is. I had a lot of bot filters in my GA3 view that I didn't necessarily need to recreate in GA4 because the numbers were already kind of similar. So I think it's doing better, but it's certainly not perfect.
My question is the user engagement.
Oh, 1 sec, I don't think that mic's on.
So my question's with the user engagement. Is that 5 hours and 31 minutes?
No, sorry.
Or 5 minutes.
Again, they switched the math a little bit. Whereas before they would give you minutes and seconds, now you're getting minutes and I don't even know, seconds and milliseconds. so just kind of like use your eyeballs to compare the first 2 chunks of this to that one.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, one of my clients is a very complex, homegrown configurators and e-commerce, homegrown e-commerce site. We've developed tags over years with the help of Google Tag Team. And will those tags be automatically converted over to GA4? Because it's years of work that went into this.
Not necessarily no, they're not going to be pulled in by default, but you can, there's an option in there, I don't know if I could find it quickly enough, but in the settings in GA4, there's an option, I think it's under data stream settings, to kind of honor like universal analytics events and pull them in. Actually, it might be under configure and then events. Somewhere in there, I'm still getting used to where things are. There's an option to pull your universal analytics events into GA4. Now that's a temporary solution because obviously the universal analytics is going to go away. Are you doing your tags in Tag Manager? Okay, yeah. All right, so then that is not so bad of a transition. You will have to kind of create copies of them and assign them to the GA4 config tag in there instead of the other one. I'm honestly still battling the same thing with a lot of our clients, and I don't have it completely figured out yet, but I see a path where there's like a way to kind of just duplicate them all, tweak them all, and not have to recreate the wheel completely.
So it's a matter of duplicating the tags?
I think that's going to be the best way. Like, I'm still playing with it, trying to find the best possible solution, but for now, that's what I think we're going to have to do. We're all still figuring it out. Hi, I'm sorry I gave you a heart attack in the beginning.
Yeah, well,
okay?
I look at this as more painful than root canal therapy. I mean, it's just, all right, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. But
yeah, it's
bad news. I mean, GA3 is tough enough, and now GA4, come on now. But I wanted to know if you set up Data Studio, should you, and you're already pulling from GA3, will it automatically pull from GA4 if you convert to GA4?
No.
So then you have to go into the Data Studio and then reconfigure something.
Well, so let me see if I can make this.
What would be the best way to do this? I guess you
Yeah,
you
let me
first
click on
convert to
that.
GA4 and then you go to Data Studio and then you make your changes in there.
Right. So, well, if you first convert to, well, it depends on when you start using Data Studio. If you have an existing Data Studio report, let's just say this is a separate report and it's
Right.
all GA3. You have a couple of different options. You could do a side-by-side like I'm doing. I'm not going to do this forever, obviously, but I do want to make sure there's consistency, that the metrics are at least somewhat close for now. So you could do like side-by-side where you have like this one, the data source is set to the GA3 data source, and then copy-paste and change that one to the GA4. That's how I made this. That's one option. Another option is take your whole GA3 Data Studio report and do the file, make a copy. And if you only had GA3 on there, you would just select GA4. Now, there'll be a couple of things that won't work that way, like the metrics that don't exist anymore. You'll have to manually go to those. But a bunch of them are the same. So it's not too painful of a process. If you haven't been using Data Studio at all, I highly suggest just go with GA4 from the get-go.
Right, and just not even use Data Studio?
Sorry, what was that?
And not use Data Studio?
No, use Data Studio, but don't bother if you're just starting
Right,
Data
right,
Studio, don't bother connecting it to the old one, even though these metrics are what you're still used to seeing right now. Just kind of try to force yourself to go GA4 from the get-go. But at least this way, like you still have to learn the new metrics and what they mean and everything, but you don't have to learn a whole new interface, at least. I mean, you're learning the Data Studio interface, but it's a lot easier than...
At this point, I just want to go back to Jetpack.
So there's a talk later today, actually, that is going to discuss alternatives. So I'll plug that talk. Victor's going to talk about alternatives. You may want to get away from Google Analytics entirely, and that's totally an option. So we have a couple more minutes.
Hey again. So
Hi.
my question is, like, a lot of the advertising platforms put the UTM medium, UTM source parameters in the URL. Is all of that carried over cleanly, and you're able to kind of filter your reports and stuff with those?
It's all carried over. I wouldn't say cleanly. What you're going to want to study with regard to UTMs is, let's see, the default channel definitions. I don't think I have to put Google Analytics to get it. Yeah, okay, default channel definitions. Let me see if I can get them sort of side by side here. Okay, so yes, this article is about universal analytics. So this is currently how Google Analytics interprets and kind of files the UTM tagged traffic. So it's mostly based on medium, sometimes on source, but oh, my screen's not showing. There we go. Okay, so it's mostly based on medium. So if you have UTM medium equals CPC, it's gonna file it in the paid search bucket. A lot of what people do now with like paid social is they will use CPC or PPC, and then because there's no source filter here now, it gets dumped into paid search, which doesn't really make sense. So I think there's a smidge of a redeeming quality in GA4 here that they've changed these a bit so that you have now, for example, oops, sorry. I don't know why they show you paid social tags for Google Ads. I can't even imagine how that is even possible. So that's what you'll see first. Scroll down to channels for manual traffic to see something that makes sense. And so now there's the same medium filter. They put a little regex on it because a lot of people also use paid social for their medium for paid social traffic. But now it will look at the source and see if it's Google, or this is basically the same thing here, or if it's a known social site. And so you'll have paid social and paid search. So yeah, not exactly cleanly, but I actually think the new way is slightly better. So you may have to make a few adjustments, but then I think it's going to be better going forward.
Thanks, that was super helpful.
Good, good. Hello, my dear.
Let me take this off. So, can you explain the difference between engagement rate and bounce rate?
I'm still trying to figure that out myself, honestly.
That is fair.
Yeah, I'm learning along with everyone else. I was like, I know that question's going to come up. I got to spend more time studying that before this. No, haven't gotten there yet. Sorry. I will keep you posted.
Thank you.
All right. Got, I think, one more minute, right? If anyone else has a question. No more bounce rate. Actually, you know, I did call it one of my favorite metrics and said I was sad to see it go, but it's so easily manipulated and often inaccurate that I am kind of glad that they switched it to something else. I still need to wrap my head around exactly how they're calculating the engagement rate, but I think I'm going to be more happy with it than bounce rate because it was so often incorrect. All right. I think that's a wrap then. Thank you.